Thank you, Prof. Tan, for such an insightful presentation on higher education in Singapore. It's my pleasure now to invite Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy, Director of the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, to join Professor Tan and chair the interactive session.
I'm sure all of you enjoyed this insightful talk by Professor Tan as much as I did, and probably many of you are still rolling over many of the questions he raised and the answers he gave. My mind is sort of just bubbling over a lot of issues. First thing that struck me is that here you have this wonderful mathematician. Probably love nothing better than to just curl up in his room with his Lie groups and combinatorics and not worry about all this. But like hell, you are worried about the future. You are really completely consumed by worry about what's going to happen to everybody. Which is good, of course, you're working for your community. But this is interesting, that here you have a country, and you can think of a few examples like this. Norway is another example. Doing very well, a big sovereign fund, if money was everything, they already have it, okay? And you would think that everything's set up fine, it's nothing to worry about, in fact. But probably, if you look at their entire history of 50 years and even going before, probably they've never been as worried as they are today. And the reason for this, as of course he's pointed out, is this huge change, as mathematicians say, that d by dt is just too big, right? And things are changing too fast. And really one way to look at this is to also take a step back and see things on a 1,500-year or 2,000-year time frame, right? When he was speaking, I was just reminded, and people are talking, I think Mr. Kumar talked about, his coming to India and, having a side visit to Chennai and so on. And for some reason, my mind briefly went to this book that I read, The Ocean of Churn by Sanjeev Sanyal, which talks about the number of, the long over centuries, more than a millennium, the to and fro traffic between our parts of the world, right? About the heir to the throne of Kanchivaram, not far from here, being brought from Indonesia because there was no heir here and so on. And so if you look at it from those times until very recently, 100 years ago, you had a lot, you had people, you had craftsmen. Craftsmen were people who brought in a lot of individuality into their work. Whoever could do it, could carve out a niche for themselves, could do well. And the rest had jobs or tasks which were more repetitive, which you could become skilled at. And you had this sort of, he talked about 40-40-20, but you had some kind of a breakup between those who did repetitive jobs well with some skills and those who were craftsmen. And when the industrial revolutions of various kinds, 1, 2, 3, all came, you had a lot of the craftsmen, of course, becoming the pioneers of industry, but you had a lot of them also downgrading themselves to people who did skilled but repetitive jobs, So in countries like Japan, many craftsmen became the industrialists who set up all the companies whose names are household names for you. In many other countries, like in India, many craftsmen became impoverished or relatively impoverished. Even now, the craftsmen we have in handlooms, for example, have to compete with machine-made textiles and products, and therefore they cannot generate the real value for what they do because of the competition. So this has happened. Now with the automation that he talked about briefly, but I thought he would probably talk about it a lot more, this whole option of having repetitive jobs, however skilled they may be, is just going to disappear to varying degrees at various times in various verticals. If you have ever heard Professor Misha Doller from King's College, you can go YouTube him. He talks about the next internet, Internet of Things is what everybody's talking about today, but he talks about the Internet of Skills. So once you have gigabit per second kind of low latency links, you can actually, a doctor can operate from anywhere, as well as he or she could operate from right next to the patient. So then you get the Internet of Skills. So with all of this, let's say you have all the money in the world. Money is not the issue. After all, if you think about it, it doesn't take much for somebody to feed themselves 3 times a day or 2 times a day, and it doesn't take much to find a roof. Surprisingly, even healthcare isn't that expensive. It's just the way we organized ourselves that's made it that way. In fact, in this country, if you go back to our tradition, food, healthcare, all of this was always free because it wasn't very expensive to provide. So, another question to ask is, if all the money that you needed was available, what would you still do with yourself? How would you get fulfillment? What is the business of higher education all about? Would you have a whole lot of people running crazy, not knowing what to do with themselves, or would they know what to do with themselves? Would you have enough? I mean, the way the economies have been organized is that you do something for which you earn and you make a living, right? But suppose these two get disentangled, as it's likely to become. How well you live is pretty much a function of how well you're governed, not how much money you really have as a country. That's pretty easy to fix, let's say. Then what would you do? What's the role of higher education? What's the role of education in general? How would people find their fulfillment? You could earlier, again in this country we believe, you could find your fulfillment even in repetitive jobs. It's there in all our wisdom. You could find it also, of course, in the highest realms of thinking. But what would happen in the future when the repetitive jobs disappear? So I would like to, Professor Tan, you must have thought about many of these things, if not all. So, I'd like you to reflect on some of these issues, because these are, what you talked about are sort of real-time responses to the way things are happening.
Yeah.
But on a longer time scale, there are things that are going to happen. Maybe not, you don't know when it's going to happen, 10 years now or 15 years or 20 years, but on that time scale, it hardly matters. It's going to happen. So when it happens, what does Singapore see its 40,000 cohort doing every year? What do they, training yourself for 50 years of change is one thing, but finally, if only a few people are needed to do many of the things that need to be done, and a lot of the rest is, flipping dosas or burgers or whatever it is, and all of that, including a lot of the things that are now considered the realm of skilled people, surgery and so on. If a lot of that gets automated, then what do people do with themselves? And how do you sort of still make life a meaningful exercise? I would say that is really, on a 50 or 60 year time scale, that's our challenge. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we tend to think more short term than long term. And certainly, maybe if one is more optimistic, the world can always readjust itself and settle.
I'd like to know how you
settle on an equilibrium. But personally, I don't believe that that is the natural tendency. I think things are getting more complex. When we move from the first industrial revolution to the second industrial revolution to the third industrial revolution, that's actually a lot of space available, and the space creates a lot of the opportunities, and therefore people who are displaced can be sort of retrained. I tend to think that this revolution is something very special, and the ability for us human beings to try to adapt to this can vary, right? Can vary. My sense is that if you are a bigger country, you probably have more space and more cushion, right? For small countries like Singapore, I've earlier said that we are price takers, right? We don't set the price. We have less choice. So it becomes really more of a survival, right? And rather than thinking that, well, okay, things will come to an equilibrium, and we can just sit back a little bit, not to be too stressed by it. I guess that's probably not too much of the Singapore psyche, right? If you think about just a simple thing, water, I think we are going to run into a big problem with water. Not just Singapore, but actually every country. Right? Singapore, I think we are extremely paranoid because we used to have 80% of our water supplied from Malaysia. Right? And for some time, we were actually quite happy, right, that there is this agreement that Malaysia will continue to supply the water to us. But it did dawn on us that what if this doesn't continue? And there's no reason why it should continue, right? And it becomes a problem of survival. And that's why in the last 20 years, the government has invested on water technologies. Now pretty much we are in the comfortable position to say that come what may, all right, we have the technologies to provide 100% of all the water that we need. Right? And, but in recent times, you're already seeing some of these things happening. Maybe not quite what you anticipated. So the reservoir which provides the water to Singapore from Malaysia, the Lingui Reservoir, last year, I think for a few months, was almost dry. And during those months, Singapore actually re-export water back to the reservoir. All right, and that in a way, I mean, it's not intended, but it's climate change. It's climate change, right? And you never sort of think, you know, what could possibly happen. But at least I think we are prepared for it. And if you look early part of this year, South Africa, they still are threatened by water, right? Now they have to tell people don't use water, right? And I'm not sure how they're going to solve the problem. But to be frank, there are already technologies to help them solve the problem. You have contaminated groundwater, you have contaminated river waters. I think this is going to be a problem. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is that it's not in the Singapore psyche to try to be complacent, because I think anything happens, we could just disappear overnight. It doesn't make a dent to the population of the world, right? It doesn't make a dent to the population of the world, right? We're already like 3 million strong. It doesn't make a dent at all. The world has 7 billion people. So we are very paranoid.
I'd like to now throw the floor open for questions from the audience. We'll have to have some discipline in how we do this. Let me see if I can sort of mentally capture the sequence in which hands go up. Sir, I think you were the first.
Thanks a lot. I'm Sridhar from Great Lakes Institute of Management. And first of all, thanks to sharing your success stories, and success breeds success. And one of the things when you said, when you compare with Singapore, with China and other countries like India, for example, Peking University and other things, we are all educationists here. And what will be your idea or suggestion for us if you have to increase our benchmark? As you say, the space is more in India. If we contribute more, we can do more to the world. So what will be your suggestion on this angle for us to increase the benchmark, or at least look upon your parameters of higher quality education? Thank you.
Thanks. Should I respond directly?
It's for you.
Well, my sense is that not all universities are set up to be the same, right? And all systems, especially in a big country like India, you need a variety of higher education institutions to address certain target groups, right? And therefore, because universities are quite different, it is actually very difficult to sort of rank all universities using the same set of parameters, right? We do benchmarking very often, but we really pick those that we feel are similar in terms of our mission, in terms of the type of students that we have. And then we compare with this group. So one typical group that NUS picks would be the state universities in the US. I wouldn't want to compare NUS with Harvard, Yale, or Princeton because these are very niche, very well endowed universities. We can't really be compared with them. They take in 1,500 students every year. Quite unlike me, I take in 7,000 and take the cream, right? So I compare myself with state universities and I do the sort of benchmarks, right? So even though I've quoted the rankings, we are always very careful about rankings, all right? Because rankings do not reflect the complex nature of universities. And there's a whole spectrum of universities and higher education framework. And I think you need to really understand and benchmark appropriately, all right? But what we can do is this, be very open, right? Be very open. There are certain things which some universities do very well, right? I think be very open to learn. So NUS, actually we learn a lot from many universities, right? What is different is that we learn, we adapt. We don't copy, right? We do not copy because we are very aware that different environments, the operating environments are very different. What we learn from US, if it works in US, it may not work in the same way in Singapore. So we tweak it and we adapt it, all right, to make sure that it works, right? And that's the key reason why when we partner with universities, so we have 3 major collaborations. One was with Peabody Institute of Johns Hopkins, which we set up our first conservatory. The second one was a second medical school with Duke University to set up Duke NUS Medical School, our second medical school in NUS. And third was the Yale NUS collaboration to set up a liberal arts college in NUS. In all these 3, all right, we have actually had a very clear understanding with our partners that we do not have an intention to have an exact copy in our Singapore. But what we want is to find the essence, the key essence and the key benefits, and then try to bring it to Singapore, right? But that requires actually very a deep collaboration, a good understanding, and a good partner, but can be done.
I'd like to throw the next question open to a lady.
I'm Thangam Meghnathan, Chairperson Rajalakshmi Institutions. Thank you very much for that wonderful talk and how you are bracing yourself with the future oncoming challenges thrown by the technology and things like that. The changes in technology and skills, all that you were talking about, that can be a sort of a threat to the universities. I'm wondering whether technology itself is going to be a threat to the university because the content can be provided by the technology platform, and whether the conventional universities will continue to exist in future is a question.
I would say that it is also both a help and a threat. Technology, like many things, is a double-edged sword, right? And it's just that how can you harness the positive side and mitigate the influences of the negative side. Not easy, but it is important. And one key thing that university can do is to make sure that you get your students to understand technology, all right? To understand technology and harness the full power. So at NUS, we are very well aware, right? Data analytics, I mean, I was just discussing during lunch that these days, if you go to companies, they would like to have A, B, C, D, E, F. What are these? A for AI, B for blockchain, C for cloud computing, D for data analytics, E for economics, F for finance. Now, E and F are traditional, all right? A, B, C, D are some of the new emerging technologies that all companies would like to have and to have their colleagues learn. Now, how do I prepare my graduates so that they have a good understanding of these emerging technologies, right? Something like AI, all right? AI is indeed powerful, but there are limitations on AI, right? And you really should not be frightened of AI, right? But you want to know how can you harness AI for your personal development, for your personal advantage. And that I feel that universities are in a position to do. All right, so we have to educate our graduates, you know, about understanding technology and about how to harness and take advantage of technology. And also to tell them that what are some of the side effects, undesirable effects, and how you mitigate it. I hope I answered that question.
No, undesirable effects, I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was just trying to talk about like whether technology companies can provide what universities are providing today.
So, ma'am, I can tell you this, that, you know, again, even in the business of running universities, universities also do a combination of what you might call routine tasks and non-routine tasks, you know, even faculty and teaching staff. Automation in one form or the other will whittle down the routine tasks. You might say, well, still a teacher teaching something is different from a recorded video. It's true. But recording, I mean, a technology tool with AI working in the background could do many of the things that a teacher can do as long as it's fairly repetitive. You know, teacher might be modifying a little bit based on the experience of the teacher, but some of that the AI tools will learn. But finally, when it comes to really teaching the students how to think, ask questions, and so on, going back to say the Zen masters or any of our traditional, that it'll never happen. So, but that's the thing. So, routine stuff will disappear everywhere, and only the non-routine will remain, and that will be very few. That was my question to him also. Anyway, so that. Sitara, you have to tell us how much time we have. You are the master of the time or clock. 15 more minutes.
Okay.
Okay, sir. I think there was the person there. Yeah.
Yeah, I am Professor Venkateshwaran from Laila College. Professor Tan, you made a beautiful presentation. I have certain viewpoints. One is that US being a small country, do you make a perspective manpower planning to ensure that Singapore requires so many engineers, so many technicians, so many polytechnic people, so many doctors? Are you able to do that? Because university should only do that, or education department should do that. Are you doing it? Because in India it is not being done. So many engineering colleges, every year lakhs of engineers are coming out. They remain unemployed or underemployed. They are going for 10,000, 5,000 rupees salary. Lot of resources are being wasted. There is a glut of engineers. Are you able to do that and give a model for India at least to be adopted later? Because it is not being done in India.
Yes, I think in a way Singapore size helps. So our Ministry of Manpower does a lot of this manpower estimates and works very closely with the Ministry of Education to sort of set guidelines for universities. So universities are given a guide on how many engineers we should produce, how many scientists we should produce, and so on and so forth. So the smallest of Singapore allows us to really have a more tighter sort of planning, which is important.
Professor Tan,
Okay.
yeah,
1 minute,
yeah.
1 minute, please. I think we have to. Some lady, I want to keep alternating.
Good.
Yeah, I think there. I can. Sorry, you have to wear a bright dress. I think the one at the back is losing out. Ma'am, you can, the red sari, you can. You have to catch my eye. So.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Professor Tan. I'm Dr. Sandra from Stella Maris College, Chennai. Coming from a humanities background, I appreciate your presentation on telling us about technology and the future of technology and preparing our young ones to face that future. I'd like to know what in the area, or what is the scope of humanities, let's say social sciences, sociology, social work, and how does higher education in Singapore address problems like, let's say, migration, gender, class, health. You touched a little bit on water as a concern, and I'm thankful for that, but could you throw some more light on how you do that?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question. So if you look at the educational framework of NUS, prior to 1994, we have adopted the UK system, right, where you have deep specialization the moment you join your university. So I went through that system as an undergraduate student, and when I did my undergraduate studies also at NUS, I chose mathematics, and I did a little bit of physics and a little bit of computer science and nothing else. Right now, we adopted the American T-shaped competency, where the vertical part of the T refers to a major. And usually you spend about 2.5 years or 2 years on the major. And the horizontal part of the T refers to a more broad-based education, stretching from the humanities, sciences, all the way to engineering. And we want our students to actually be more broad-based, and that seems to be good. Now, because of lifelong learning, I'm trying to persuade my students to not stop at one T, but to go for 2 Ts or double T. A double T to a mathematician is a pi. So I've been asking my students, consider a pie-shaped competency. And one of the pillars ideally should be in a STEM subject: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The other one should be in humanities or social sciences. That gives you very strong foundation. And I think foundation is very important because you're talking about learning for 40 to 50 years. You want to build strong foundation in humanities and social sciences as well as the sciences and mathematics. It actually also, well, physiologically, right, STEM is supposedly activate the left part of your brain, and the humanities activates the right part of your brain. You need actually both parts of your brain to work more. So that's what we are trying to push. And here I'm emphasizing that humanities and science actually play very critical roles.
So we have time for 2 more questions, so I'm going to go to the back. Some gentleman in the back, anybody raise your hand? Otherwise, sir, you are the one late. It's time for the men too. Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Professor Tan, Eng Chai, it was an insightful speech.
Thank you.
Reminding me of my NTU experience. Okay, I have a question here. In India, most of the engineering graduates come from private institutions, as you may be aware. And this is something which very similar to what is your experience. You talk about Beijing University and your own university, and you take a lot of students who have to be graduated at the same time, whereas in the Beijing, they got a more higher, better choice in terms of quality of students. So now you have got a lot of experience, I feel, which is relevant to our private universities. So maybe do you have any policy of collaborating with private universities in India and sharing your experience? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we have actually collaborated with a lot of private universities, probably outside the India. And we have tried, I mean, personally, we have tried to work initially with the very sort of top universities like the IITs. So IIT Madras has a very strong collaboration with NUS. We are certainly happy to explore sort of private universities. But NUS, we don't have really a very broad bandwidth. We are already quite stretching ourselves quite a bit, but we can explore to see what we can do together.
Take the last question, the lady there. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Divya, and I'm from the National Institute of Fashion Technology in Chennai. Thank you, Professor Tan, for this wonderful and insightful lecture. I have two interrelated questions which are regarding your industry-based courses. So when you have students who are going for, you said anywhere between 1 year to 1.5 years of industry program, how do you equip your faculty to be able to mentor these students? As an interrelated question, what is your plan, or how do you manage lifelong learning for your own faculties? And what is that we can hope to learn from that? Thank you.
Thank you. Very pertinent question. The first one, you need really a very close working relationship with industry. And typically, we would have two supervisors, one from the department and one from the industry. And they have to work together to chart the learning journey of the student, be it half a year or one year of internship. What are some of the expected outcomes of going through this particular internship, and whose responsibility it is to check on the students, to test on the students. Very often you'll find that both mentors would work very, very closely together. That's easier said than done, because we have like a few thousand students going for this sort of internships, right? And it sometimes can be challenging that some will fall through the gaps, right? Yeah. Now the second thing about faculty members, it's very important that our faculty members don't stand still, right? Because they have to learn too, right? And one important thing is that if your faculty members are active in research, that's the key. All right, that ensures that they are current. Because when you are active in research and you are researching in an emerging area, you have to be fast. You have to know what's happening, and you have to be, 1 or 2 steps ahead. All right, so research active faculty members is one sort of, I would say, indication that this person is actually moving ahead and learning. Now, researchers, all right, I do less research now, but our research active faculty, they are learning all the time. All right, in order to do research, you have to learn something new. All right, often you have to cross to another different discipline and learn something new altogether. All right, so that sort of things is sort of inbuilt into a researcher. Now, having said that, it is also very important for our researchers to make sure that they are current to what are the new interests in the industry. All right, particularly in the emerging technologies. In fact, I find that universities usually lag behind the top companies. So give an instance, in the area of AI, all right, or blockchain, I would say generally universities are behind the top companies like Alibaba, Tencent, Google, and so on and so forth. These companies really fully invested because it's actually profit for them, or at least a profit motivation is extremely strong. And they are also able to harness a huge number of talents to work on them. In fact, in these emerging areas, right, universities are particularly challenged. My worry is not between a top university and NUS. My worry is a big company and NUS, because they come to the university, they poach you, right? They are able to say, okay, come and work with me, I'll give you 3 times your salary. I can't do that. I see a big challenge. But nonetheless, you still have to bring the companies nearer to the university. And earlier on, I mentioned the internships being a way in which you pull the professors nearer to the industry. Another way in which we do that in Singapore is that the government sponsors research collaborations between industry and the university under this framework known as a corporate lab. So just recently, for instance, last week, NUS set up a corporate lab with Applied Materials. Applied Materials is the world's leading semiconductor and display technology company. It's probably the #1 in the world. And they came into a partnership with NUS to set up a joint lab in NUS to look at semiconductors and display technology. And that is jointly funded by Applied Materials as well as the Singapore government. Now, these sort of vehicles are very useful, again, for professors to know what is current in the important emerging areas. But we have to continue to find means to make sure that our professors are current. Right? I think that is quite critical in this sort of rapidly evolving external environment.
Okay, so I'd like to ask all of you to join me in thanking Professor Tan.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to also say this, that if you really listen carefully, you learned a lot about how he and his team and the government, Singapore government at large, is thinking about coping with the changes that are happening and are imminent. He also mentioned, in the context of their collaborative relationships, that you can't take ideas from one place and transplant them thoughtlessly, that you have to learn, you have to find the essence, as he said, if I'm right, and adapt them to your own circumstances. This is definitely true for all of us. We can't just take whatever they're doing and transplant it. But actually, it's even more true within the country. This country is so vast that there are so many differences as you travel this vast land that you can't even transplant ideas blindly from one part of the country to the other. So the key is that. The key is actually figuring out the underlying thought process and then seeing what has to be done in your own context, in the context of your own institution. He talked about research as being a vehicle for keeping faculty on a learning curve. But research may not be there in every institution of the, even he mentioned about four other Singapore universities that don't have much research. So the solution for them is different. So you have to understand what the thinking process is and adapt it. And that's really what we all have to do. And if, I don't know how many of you know the world of a pure mathematician, but if a pure mathematician like him can wrap his mind around all of this, there's no reason why all of us cannot. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much.
I think, ladies and gentlemen, let's us once again put our hands together to thank Professor Tan and Professor Ramamurthy for such an engaging session. Thank you very much. With that, we have come to the end of today's ISAS-CII Distinguished Lecture 2018, and on behalf of ISAS and CII, I would like to thank you for your presence and participation. And on behalf of ISAS, we would also like to place a heartfelt thanks and appreciation to CII for their partnership and support in organizing today's event. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you and see you in our forthcoming events. Thank you. Good evening.